You know what I've been enjoying lately? Spanish horror films. I feel like over the last few years, there's been some really entertaining horror films coming from Spain. Time and again, I've popped in a Spanish film, and I've come away at the end of it thinking, wow, Spain is really where it's at the moment when it comes to just great modern horror films. So today, I'm coming to you not necessarily with a top 10 as such, but with a list of 10 Spanish horror films made in the last 5 years, so since 2018, that I personally would recommend checking out if you want to get a flavour of really great Spanish horror cinema. One very quick thing to get out of the way first, I have narrowed this list down to just Spanish horror films. At one point, I was thinking of maybe including some Mexican or Argentinian films as well, because there's quite a crossover in terms of Spanish language involvement, but I figured it would probably be better to keep this list to just stuff from Spain. Now, I'm going to start off this list with two slightly broader picks. For the most part, I will be doing this list roughly in order of how good I think these films are, just because, that's how these lists tend to go. But I'm going to stick two films in at the start as sort of maybe like honourable mentions, just because of a little technicality, and that technicality is that these are two films made in Spain with Spanish directors and Spanish crews, but which feature more familiar kind of English language actors in them. They're sort of co-productions made with bigger English language studios that just happen to have been shot in Spain with Spanish directors for whatever reason. But both these films are on this list because I think they're both really good, and because they do largely fit the criteria for being films that have got a largely Spanish DNA. So, starting off at number 10, from 2018 is Down a Dark Hole, directed by Rodrigo Cortés, director of the film Buried, and also 2012's Red Lights, which for me personally is a solid, I think probably a 9 out of 10, just really, really love Red Lights. But Down a Dark Hole is based on a book by Lois Duncan, who's a name you might know. She wrote the original book that I Know What You Did Last Summer was based on, amongst other things. Down a Dark Hole is a stylish gothic horror film set in a school for troubled young girls. This film has got an absolutely phenomenal cast, both young and old. You've got Rebecca Front, you've got Isabel Furman from Orphan, Taylor Russell, who'd go on to be in Bones and All and the Escape Room films, and a fantastic turn from Uma Thurman as the head of this school. There's such a great combination of actresses in this, plus a really great character-driven story, that when you find out what it's actually all about, is one of the most original and fascinating ideas that I have personally seen in a long time. Really incredible twist on a fairly standard spooky old house sort of film. I would recommend this film thoroughly, just lots of fun. Next up, for the honourable mentions, a sort of joint number 10, is Feedback from 2019, also known as Hostage Radio. Directed by Pedro Alonso, a first-time director, and featuring, once again, a top-notch cast. This time, a lot of British talent. You've got Anthony Head and the always amazing Richard Brake, putting in one of his best kind of low-key performances, and starring, of course, Eddie Marsan as this kind of controversial late-night talk radio show host who is just so believably loathsome in this film. His character finds himself forced to stay on air as masked baddies take over the station one night to get their revenge on Eddie Marsan's character for something that he's done to them in the past. This is a great little contained horror film / thriller, all set in this one location. I remember saying earlier this year I reviewed a film called Nightmare Radio: The Night Stalker, and I said then that I just love that late night radio station setting and that I'd wished that it got used a lot more. Well, this is a great example of that. The tension in this situation is really, really well done, with just a few really excellent actors trapped in this tight location, putting all of the emphasis on the strength of the script and the acting, and neither disappoints. I guess there's maybe an argument that this film isn't entirely a horror film as such, that it's more of, I suppose, maybe a thriller, It's really just sort of the level of violence and threat in this that I think pushes it over the edge. If you count something like The Purge as a horror film, then it's about that level of intensity and violence. But really, I think it deserves a mention no matter how tenuous that connection might be. So, now we're moving on to just the purely Spanish language horror films, and at number 9 on this list, we have got The Passenger from 2022, directed by Raúl Sorizo and Fernando González Gómez. So, The Passenger is kind of a horror road trip film. It's got fairly comedic characters in it and some pretty fun, gloopy kind of special effects, as we follow this oddball bunch that are thrown together as they travel cross-country. Along the way, they knock over a woman in the middle of the night that appears from out of nowhere, only to realise that when they pick her up, she is in fact harbouring a sinister parasitic alien presence within her. You've got some great body horror effects in this one and a very deft mixing of comedic characters in a story that gets pretty serious and sincere as it goes along. This is a real sleeper hit of a film for just how well it kind of pulls off that blend of tones that I think in less capable hands might not have worked this well. The lead character starts off as someone that you think is going to be annoying as fuck, but by the end of the film, it's hard not to be really won over by his character's kind of grouchy charms. This is a film that's just really got a bit of everything in it, but at the same time, it never feels messy or like it doesn't know exactly what it's trying to do. This was a film that made it into my top 20 of last year, and this team of directors then went on to direct The Elderly that came out in 2023. Next up at number 8 on this list is maybe, along with last year's X, a film that I think has got one of the shittiest titles of all time. A shitty, nondescript title for an extremely memorable and unique film though. And that film is 2, also known as DOS, from 2021. Directed by Mar Tarragona, who would go on to direct The Cuckoo's Curse in 2023, this is one of those films that for me really makes me think of those kind of 2000s Saw era films which start with that group of people wake up in a room plot. The story in this one, a man and a woman wake up in a room and find that somebody has sewn their bodies together at the stomach, and they then have to figure out what's happened to them. Now, you might think that this sounds like budget Human Centipede. It's not. It's much more of an adult character-based film rather than just kind of playing that situation for kind of squirmy body horror shock value. Again, that seems to be a recurring thing in a lot of these Spanish films, which is wild plots being played in a very serious and straightforward way, which I personally really like. I think DOS is really the ultimate two-hander, and both of the actors in this do a great job with a really well-layered, twisty plot. The lead actress in this, Marina Gatell, was also in Carlos Atane's Maximum Shame, which is one of the strangest films you're ever likely to see in your life, which I think earns her points as somebody that's just absolutely fearless and unafraid to commit to doing these really kind of bizarre, challenging roles. Really though, this is just one of those films where the whole central premise is just so intriguing that you can't help but want to really check it out. It's just such an enticing plotline, and plus, even if you don't particularly care for it, this one clocks in at a tight 71 minutes anyway, so it really doesn't overstay its welcome. Moving on to number 7 on this list of Spanish horror recommendations, we have got, from 2023, a film called Phenomena, which I think you can still find on Netflix. The director of this film is Carlos Theron, who's somebody who's more known as a director of Spanish language comedies. And I think what's interesting about that is that a lot of the cast members in this film are actually more known for their comedy work. But again, this is a film that isn't especially played as a comedy. It's sort of loosely based on some sort of real events about the Hepta group, who are this team of supernatural kind of Ed and Lorraine Warren type supernatural investigators. Now, me personally, I just take this film for what it is, which is a fun, heartfelt character piece with a very strong and likeable cast. I think especially Tony Acosta, who is the lead, is a really kind of watchable presence. I could easily handle sequels to this film with us following her character through different cases, just because I think she does such a great job in this film. For a fun, kind of frothy, witty caper, it does actually get pretty legitimately emotional by the end. The writer of this film, Fernando Navarro, has written quite a few kind of interesting genre things over the year, including Jaume Balaguero's Venus. Phenomena is just slick, looks great, and it's just full of heart. And spoilers for the top 10 of 2023, there is a chance that Phenomena could be in there. Next up, at number 6 from 2022, we've got another period piece, which is Valley of the Dead, directed by Javier Rui Caldera and Alberto de Toro, who, bizarrely, Alberto de Toro was the editor of Phenomena. He's actually somebody who's much more known as being an editor than he is a director. Now, Valley of the Dead is a hugely enjoyable World War II with zombies kind of caper film. It's full of big, comic booky, larger-than-life characters, and it's directed with so much style and pace, and just this sense of fun. It's a big, epic production, it looks great, it's got a real swagger to it, and again, it starts off kind of fun and exciting, and it ends up getting very legitimately emotional. It's a great mix, though, and Valley of the Dead is big, blockbuster horror done right, with a great old-fashioned dose of adventure and mayhem alongside some pretty savage violence and horrific moments. Sadly, I never actually got around to watching this last year when it came out. I think there's a little bit of a confusion as to what year it actually officially got released in, because I think there's a chance it could have actually been a top maybe 15 or 20 of the year, just because it's so big and colourful, and I just love films like this that have got just so much style to them. Next up at number 5, getting into my top 5 recommendations, and we have got Holly Blood, also from 2022 and directed by Jesus Font. Holly Blood is a really simple but very likeable, warm-hearted high school vampire film. Basically, the plot is that our lead character pretends to be a vampire in order to win the heart of a girl that he's in love with, who's kind of obsessed with Twilight. He concocts this whole kind of elaborate hoax to the point where he genuinely starts to believe that he is actually a vampire himself, unaware that, of course, the weird new kid in school is in actual fact a real vampire. The comedy in this film is just genuinely funny, but I think what helps sell this is the fact that the characters are just so sincere and likeable. You really care for them, you really want them to succeed, and the awkward kind of teen high school comedy and romance is nicely done. Holly Blood, which is the kind of title of the in-universe Twilight-like vampire film that everyone's obsessed with, is definitely one of the most fun films on this list. It's not ashamed to go just pure, daft comedy at times. And that is fine, because it does it with such a warm, innocent charm. The complete opposite of pretty much every kind of scummy American teen film that gets made these days. Number 4 on this list is another 2023 film, and oddly, is also another school film. And that is Killer Book Club, directed by Carlos Alonso Ojea. Now, this is a really slick, smartly directed slasher film that takes a pretty basic concept. A bunch of kids torment one of their teachers, accidentally kill him, then end up getting picked off one by one, and it just really goes to town and really delivers. This is easily one of the best looking films of 2023. The usual kind of stalk and slash scenes in this are just done fantastically. There's so much kind of bounce and pizzazz to this film. As with any slasher, of course, none of this is necessarily original, but I think the real selling point to this film is just how well directed it is, how much feeling and energy has been poured into making this film as good as it possibly can be. For my money, Killer Book Club is one of the best slasher films that I've seen in a good few years, that really just goes back to basics and gives us a good looking masked killer, A twisty, backstory-riddled mystery plot, a ton of victims, and some really well-designed smart set pieces. Killer Book Club, again, spoilers for the year-end list, but it's on there at the moment, and I'll really be surprised if it gets knocked off, because it's just such a great reminder of how much fun a really great serious slasher film can be without feeling the need to be kind of self-devouringly ironic and postmodern. Next up, at number 3, is a film I talked about in my top 10 of 2022, and that is The Vampiress of Barcelona. Now, this is definitely one of the bleakest films on this list, a really atmospheric, stylish take on a real-life child killer of the early 1900s. It's by no means an easy watch just because of how downbeat it is, and just generally because of its really unsavoury subject matter. But Vampiress of Barcelona is an absolutely gorgeous film to look at, using colour and black and white in very interesting ways, as well as all sorts of wonderful kind of theatrical visual gimmicks to bring this story to life in all of its kind of gloomy, gothic majesty. The whole cast in this film are phenomenal. It's very tragic, it's very poignant, and it's just one of those films that will really stay with you. In fact, I did a rewatch for all the films on this list that I hadn't seen in a while, and I think this is probably maybe the 4th time that I've seen this film.
4? That's insane.
And I actually probably liked it more than I ever have before. I think you really get more out of this film when you actually know where it's all leading, which I think is just the mark of a superbly constructed film. Now, at number 2 on this list, and I debated this quite a lot because I think there's not much between this and Vampiress of Barcelona, to the point where I could quite easily switch the two of them around, but I decided eventually that the number 2 spot on this list belongs to Alex de la Iglesias' Venetia Frenia. Because watching it again, it really is just a fantastically put together film, a gorgeously designed, smart, twisty giallo set in the beautiful city of Venice. Everything about this film just works. It zips along like a bomb, packing in tons of memorable set pieces. The story is put together with the kind of unshowy sophistication of the very best 70s giallos, and I'd say it's definitely the best looking film on this entire list. The plot revolves around essentially the city of Venice rising up against the plague of tourists that have desecrated their homes, and I think Cosimo Fusco gives probably the best performance of anyone in any of the films on this list as the uprising's noble and charismatic leader. I've seen Venetia Frenia a few times now, and every time the end of this film just hits me. It's definitely worth the wait, really smart and surprising without ever feeling pretentious or up its own arse about it. It's just one of those films that I feel like everybody should be talking about because it really is just such a classic, timeless, excellently put together horror film. And so, with that said, we've only got one pick left. The best Spanish film of the last 5 years, by some considerable margin. Easily the Spanish film that you should check out. And I think when I actually tell you what it is, you'll probably go, oh yeah, of course. In fact, you might not even immediately think of this as being a Spanish film first and foremost, just because it's one of those rare Spanish films that really did cross over into becoming a big international success. And that film is El Hoyo, also known as The Platform, from director Galder Katzelu Urrutia. Now, The Platform was a film that made quite a decent-sized splash when it originally dropped, I think on Netflix in 2020. The perfect example of a really intriguing concept film that seems really simple on the surface, but which manages to spin out into this fascinating commentary on the way that we live. Essentially, the platform itself is filled up with food, enough food to feed all of the residents of this experimental prison-type complex. But naturally, the ones at the top take what they want, whilst the ones at the bottom end up starving and going insane and eating each other. You're assigned a floor completely at random, and every month you get randomly moved to a new floor. Now, this film is majorly bleak and violent and unpleasant. The amount of suffering that these characters go through is immense, but the idea itself is one of those rare bits of writing that seems almost like, how has this not been done before, but which actually gives you just so much fascinating stuff to play with, to the point where it almost feels like it's a film that's writing itself. It's a perfect parable that somehow has arrived fully formed in this structurally flawless central concept that you can just keep bouncing really interesting ideas off one after another. Because The Platform is a perfect example of just pure ideas-driven filmmaking. It's a film that's constantly throwing out new concepts and twisting things inside out and upside down, using all of the absurdities of its own kind of rigid set of in-universe rules to highlight the insanities of our everyday lives and the equally rigid set of rules that we impose upon ourselves on a daily basis. The characters in this film are constantly thinking, they're smart, they're constantly questioning everything that's happening to them. And films about smart characters are always so much fun to watch, and this is a film that's just really fantastically quick-witted, as our characters debate the ethics and moralities of what's happening to them at every turn, as they're faced with just one hideous dilemma after another. Always asking the question, what would you do in this situation? How would you react to this? The Platform is just a fantastic, brutal fable about the darker side of human nature, and about trying to find some hope amidst the darkness whilst the people around you are tearing each other to pieces. It's an absolute gem of a film, not just the best Spanish film of the last few years, but by far one of the best films of the last few years. If you've never seen it, then please do yourself a favour, because it really is that good. But then, in their own way, so are all of the Spanish films on this list. They're all entertaining, they're all unique and memorable in their own ways, and this is really just me scratching the surface of what's out there. Because there have been tons of really great Spanish horror films made just in the last few years, and I'm sure in the future there'll be a lot more to come. So keep watching Spain is my final word on the matter, because the standard of their horror stuff lately has just been phenomenal.